All right, so you're back for day two, huh? All right, let's get going. If you didn't look at yesterday's assignment, go ahead and look at that to get you an introduction. If you were here yesterday, you know what's going on. Let's jump straight in. So let's talk about cats. Are they sexual reproducers or asexual reproducers? Think your cat at home can reproduce asexually? No, they can't. Only sexual reproduction for cats. Egg and sperm is the only way to do it. Cats cannot reproduce asexually, right? So rest assured, your cat isn't going to do some weird thing and make a bunch of kittens. Maybe you would prefer that it could do that, but it's not going to. Copperhead snake, what do you think? Sexual, asexual, both? If you said both, you were correct. Copperhead snake, if you think about it, copperhead snake and a Burmese python, which we already talked about, are going to be pretty similar. They're both reptiles and stuff, so copperhead snakes use parthenogenesis as well. By the way, if you did the printout, there's a thing that asks you about three animals that use parthenogenesis. So there's another one for you there. Let's talk about earthworms. A lot of people have sort of misconceptions about earthworms. What do you think? Sexual, asexual, both? Earthworms are only sexual. So a lot of people think, well, but I've heard that if you cut one in half, then that becomes two worms. That's not really true. Believe it or not, worms actually have a head and a tail end. Um, the way you can tell what's what is sort of see how this end is pointier and this end is sort of more round. It's because this is the butt and this is the head. Okay. Um, there's different organs throughout the worm. There's lungs in here, there's a heart in there, there's a digestive tract, there's all kinds of stuff. Okay. Now, say this is a tail end, right? Say I cut off maybe this much of the worm, right? For one, actually, let's start off saying we cut it down the middle. Okay. Cut it about here. People think that it still is two live worms because they both continue wriggling for a little bit. But in reality, if I cut it here and it just lost half of its lungs, do you think that this head end is going to do very well? Probably not. This tail end, it just lost probably its heart and its brain. Do you think this tail end is going to do very well? No, it's not. They're going to wriggle for a little while because there's still muscles in there twitching. But in reality, you kill the worm if you cut it in half. Now, say you cut it down here, you essentially kind of just cut off its tail. There's maybe not anything super important down here. You probably reduced its life, but I don't think you would kill it right away by cutting off just the last little back of the worm. Just don't go cut worms in half, guys. It's just rude. Like, what if someone came and cut you in half? You wouldn't appreciate that. Don't do that. Okay. Now let's talk about earthworm sex. Okay, and it would be pretty funny if your parent just heard that as you're watching this video in the background, right? Or maybe a younger sibling. Let's talk about it. So we talked about the head end and the butt end, right? So basically, for earthworms to do the do, they lay next to each other like this. One of them's head end is over here, one of them's tail end is over here. Now, here's the interesting thing with earthworms, there aren't boy and girl earthworms. Each earthworm is both a boy and a girl at the same time. Okay. This, and what I mean by that is they have both boy and girl parts. So each worm can produce both eggs and sperm. All right. So this little band right here, a lot of people think it looks like kind of a rubber band around the worm. That's where the eggs are. That's sort of the female part. And in a worm, the testicles are sort of long things, internal, and they essentially just sort of leak sperm through their skin, kind of like sweat, which I know is super cool, right? But that's how worms do. Okay, so we got testicles down here by the tail end, and we've got our eggs in this little egg sac up closer to the head end, right? So when worms want to do the do, they lay next to each other side by side. Now, what's important is that we have head to tail and tail to head. Okay, so essentially, this worm down here, this area where the red dot is going to be the male part of the testicles. It's going to exude the sperm through the skin, and it's going to fertilize this egg sac. At the same time, this worm part right here is going to exude sperm into this egg sac, bingo, bango, bongo, they both end up pregnant. Now, here's what's interesting. They're crawling away, right? They're crawling head first, right? And this little egg sac is closer to the head end. So on this second picture, head end is down here. Worms crawling this way through the dirt. And this egg sac sort of ends up peeling off. So you see this little arrow shows that it's sort of peeling off, falling down the end of the worm. Uh, in this picture, the egg sac is sort of entirely fallen off the end of the worm. The eggs sort of mature within that egg sac, and eventually you get little teeny weeny worms falling out of the egg sac, hatching out into the soil. Okay, so that's how worms do the do. Questions? Email me. All right, that's about all I got to say about that. Let's keep moving on. Great white sharks. What do you think? Sexual, asexual, both? They're just sexual. However, bet you didn't know sharks lay eggs. This is kind of interesting. Here is a shark egg. Now, I can't confirm that this is a great white shark egg, but this is a shark egg. So, for one, what do you think this thing is right here? That's actually the yolk. You may have thought that it was a shark, but did you notice this little curvy thing right here? That's actually going to be our baby shark. Kind of looks like a tadpole right now, right? Now, to take a second to talk about eggs, right? First off, let's just talk about general chicken eggs. Okay, so a lot of times people think that that yolk is an unborn chicken baby. That's not the case. All right, that yolk is essentially food for the baby as it's growing within the egg. Now, a human baby, y'all know that the mom has to carry the baby in her belly for 9 months. Okay, during that time, everything that the mom eats and digests, the nutrients are passed directly to the baby because the baby is still inside of mom. However, that's not how it works with eggs. It can't be a direct transmission of that nutrient, right? Because the egg is totally external from the mom. Mom deposited the egg, and there it is, totally separate from her. So, what happens is as mom is forming the egg itself, before it gets fertilized, she's forming this yolk. Okay, this yolk is essentially fats and vitamins and minerals and nutrients. That's why to eat egg yolks is actually really healthy for you because it's everything that that little baby chicken, or in this case shark, would need to grow from a tiny embryo to something that essentially fills this whole egg sac here. Okay, if we're talking about a chicken, a little embryo to a chick that would fill that whole entire, egg. So now I think that actually let's take a quick look. This is usually something that I do in class. I was talking about eggs, right? Knowing whether eggs were fertilized or not. One interesting thing that people can do is you can hold an egg up. You need to be sort of in a dark room for this. You need to hold it up to a light and sort of block out. You can see here a person sort of is holding the egg and then they're shining a light from behind it. And you can look through it and see, what looks like it's on the inside. Now, in this case, we've just got an unfertilized egg. You can see sort of the yolk right here, the darker part. It generally just looks sort of kind of opaque, right? Here's, excuse me, I promise I don't have coronavirus. Here's another one, just sort of opaque. Now, if we saw this would be an indicator of a fertilized egg. These are little veins and things growing because there's genetic material in there that says we're making a baby. Okay. Anyways, went a little bit off track there. The yolk is nutrition. It essentially goes away, it gets eaten as the thing inside, whether it's a chicken or a shark, is developing. Fun fact, these little shark eggs sometimes are called mermaid purses. Apparently this person looks like they just sort of found it washed up on the shore somewhere. Different sharks have different shaped ones. It looks like it would be incredibly uncomfortable to lay. I'm not sure. I'm not a shark. I can't speak to that. So anyway, still sexual reproduction. Still mom and dad are needed in order to make a baby shark. Just like, by the way, the eggs you get at the store, chicken eggs you get at the store, there's no way that they could be fertilized because it's just a bunch of female hens that they keep together. There's no rooster around, and a rooster is what fertilizes the eggs and would make baby chickens. So, probably the eggs you get at the store, those hens are kept away from the roosters so that babies aren't accidentally made. Humans, you think humans can reproduce asexually? We know that they can reproduce sexually. What about asexually? What do you think? No. We're just going to say sexual. So then you might think, well, what about artificial insemination? What about these things? Still involves an egg and a sperm. Doesn't matter if the sperm came from a man or a sperm donor or whatever else, still egg and sperm are needed. There are hypothetical different things that humans can do to reproduce one with one person, whatever. You can look into that on your own time if you're interested. You ask me questions if you're unsure of whether something is legit, that's fine. But humans reproduce sexually, that's it. Hydra. All right, a hydra is a little sea creature thing. Kind of looks like a little microscopic palm tree. What do you think? Sexual, asexual, or both? Hydras are both. For one, they can reproduce sexually through free spawning. The other way is that they can reproduce asexually through budding. So let's talk about free spawning real quick. It's kind of interesting. So this is actually a coral. This isn't a hydra, but this is a really good picture. Basically what happens is, and these are, by the way, aquatic things. They live in the water, in the ocean, whatever. The females shoot their eggs out into the water, and the males, you can see this little thing looks like smoke right here. The males shoot their sperm out into the water, and they just swim around in the water together. And if an egg and a sperm meet, bingo, bango, bongo, you got a baby hydra. And if they don't meet, then I guess they just sort of die in the ocean water. But you've literally got, I want to say millions, but probably more like trillions, quadrillions, tons and tons and tons of eggs and sperm floating around in here. And they all kind of do this at the same time. It's sort of almost like a breeding season. They all just sort of throw all their stuff out there and hope for the best. Kind of an interesting way to do it, if you ask me. So anyway, that's free spawning. Okay. And then here is budding. This is kind of interesting. So here's our adult hydra, right? We've got sort of the, if we're thinking palm trees, we've got sort of the trunk of the palm tree and then the leaves up here. And we can see the baby growing off the side with sort of the trunk forming down here and the leaves are forming up here. Eventually this baby will get big enough and it would sort of fall off and detach itself and fall off of the side of mom, and it would be its own whole new thing. So Hydra can use either form of reproduction there. This is a little video clip that I'm not sure will work. If it doesn't work, I'm going to try it here. If it doesn't work, you can maybe watch this on your own sometime. This is always what I think of when I think of budding.
Can you reproduce by budding? Can you?
So, yeah, anyway, I grew up on SpongeBob. SpongeBob can reproduce by budding, if you didn't know that. You can add him to your Venn diagram if you've got one going. Mushrooms. What about mushrooms? What do you think? Sexual, asexual, both? They can do both. Mushrooms are crazy, crazy things. If I would love to just spend all my time learning about mushrooms. Sexually, mushrooms do things in very complicated ways. There's a whole variety of ways that mushrooms can reproduce sexually, so I'm not going to get into that. But let's talk a little bit about an asexual form of reproduction called sporogenesis. Okay, among many other ways I said here, because mushrooms are a crazy, varied thing. They can do basically whatever they put their mind to. So mushrooms make spores. Now, here we've got this thing that says soil, and we've got a normal mushroom-looking thing, and here we've got something that doesn't quite look like our normal mushroom, and it says bread. So, any idea what this might be? If you said mold, you are correct. This is bread mold, right? It's just showing essentially two different ways that spores can form. If you ever look at the underside of a mushroom, At least a mushroom that looks like this. A lot of times you'll see these little gills. Within those gills is actually where the spores are made. Spores are essentially, I think I maybe put it somewhere here. Spores are a single cell capable of forming into a new organism. It's similar to a seed, but it's only one cell. Okay, so spore is basically a seed, but it's only one cell big. A seed is a whole bunch of cells. Spore is only one. Spores are usually dropped by the parent organism and dispersed through wind or water. So let's take a look back at this again. One interesting thing, if you're ever trying to identify a mushroom, which you may do at some point in your life, I have done that, but I'm kind of weird sometimes. Uh, what you might do is actually chop the mushroom off right there, so right underneath its head, so right where the stalk starts, and you actually put the mushroom down on a piece of white paper for a few days. It drops the spores, and basically you can learn something about that mushroom based on the color of the spores that it drops. Anyways, those gills have spores. Spores are like tiny seeds. Bread mold, to talk about that real quick. Basically the same thing, except that they don't have the gills. Think of these like a little balloon with confetti inside of it. You know, when you pop the balloon with confetti inside of it, the confetti flies all over the place. Well, that's kind of what happens with bread mold as well. Um, Spores get dropped down here, and then if you touch the plastic bag, that makes air movement, and it makes those spores sort of fly all over the bread bag. So that's why it's usually not a good idea to um, eat moldy bread at all. Even if you can sort of remove the mold that you can see, there's probably still spores. So is it going to kill you? Absolutely not, unless you just go eating lots and lots of mold. But don't do that. That's not good for you. Um, but if there's a little bit of mold on some bread and you didn't realize until after you ate a sandwich, trust me, I've done that plenty of times, you're going to be fine. Right? We already talked about that. That, by the way, if you had the printer, printed out notes, whatever, there's some things here that you would want to write down. So you could pause the video and do that. New Mexico whiptail lizard. Now, if you're putting on your critical thinking brain here and you're thinking, okay, a lizard, that's a reptile. What else have we seen that are reptiles? We saw the Burmese python and we saw the copperhead snake, I believe. And both of those could reproduce sexually or asexually. So we're probably going to guess both for this, right? New Mexico whiptail lizard is weird. We're going to quickly talk about how this works. It's only asexual. It only uses parthenogenesis. So we're at least right in that it uses parthenogenesis, like the Burmese python and the copperhead snake. Now, this is a female only species. So it can only do parthenogenesis. Remember, I was saying that snakes, I think I specifically said this with the Burmese python, but it could apply to the copperhead snake as well. They prefer to have a male to make babies with, right? They prefer that way, but if there are no males around, then they'll do the parthenogenesis so that they can make babies before they die, right? But if you're a female only species, there are never any males around to do the do with, and you just got to take care of it by yourself. So, they're often called lesbian lizards because of this. I just think that's kind of a funny thing. What's interesting, the reason they're called that, is that they still engage in mating behavior. So essentially, one still gets on top of the other one, and they like bite each other and do stuff like that. And that we scientists think that maybe stimulates ovulation, and then that's when the eggs come together and form a baby through parthenogenesis. So kind of interesting there. Uh, anyway, that's really all I have to say about them. They use parthenogenesis only because they're a female only species. Very interesting thing. You'll look more into that if you're interested. Orchid flowers. Uh, Take a, what do you think? Sexual, asexual, both. Remember, this is a flower. Flowers are sexual organs. They reproduce sexually. Um, there's a little video here that maybe I'll put a link to this for you to watch because it's pretty interesting. It shows some interesting ways. Orchids are amazing, amazing flowers that come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. This is a pretty typical orchid shape, but there's some pretty unusual ones that they talk about in this video, and they have some really unusual ways of fertilizing. It's not the typical, it's not always a typical bee lands on it, picks up some pollen, goes to another flower, deposits the pollen. You'll see if you watch that video. It's interesting, but we'll skip over it for now. All right, pandas. What do you think? Sexual. Pine trees. I don't know why I didn't put it. Why didn't I put a picture of pandas? That was weird. Pine trees reproduce sexually. Um, Fun fact: there are female and male pine cones. The male pine cones have they're tiny, and they just produce pollen. Female pine cones are big, so that they can actually catch the pollen. Pine trees actually use wind and rain to pollinate. So male pollen gets carried away by the wind, or maybe it rains on the pollen and it drips down onto a female pine cone. And these are sort of like spoons or like funnels. The seed is sort of buried way down deep in that pine cone. In class, I would pass one of the female pine cones around so you could see that. Obviously, we can't do that today, but I bet that there's a tree similar to this around you. This is particularly from a white pine tree. They have good shaped cones. But if you go outside and look at a pine tree, you will probably notice these two different types of pine cones. They may not always look exactly like this, depending on the species of tree, but just be aware of that. A lot of times people think these little ones are just baby versions of this, but no, not the case. We got female and we got male. So, fun fact. Now you know. Potatoes. What do you think? Sexual, asexual? Oh, I gave it away. They're both. Potatoes have flowers. They can reproduce sexually through those. Asexually, they can use another form of vegetative propagation. So we talked about grafting before. I'm sorry, I'm going fast, guys. I'm just trying to get through this. Tuber cuttings is the next one. So maybe you've seen this sort of thing before. Maybe you and your family hoarded a bunch of potatoes because of COVID, and now you haven't eaten them fast enough, and now they're starting to grow these little things. Can you still eat them? Yes, you can. Might they taste a little bit funny? They might. Because it's essentially taking some of the stored starches and using those stored starches as energy to start growing a little plant. That's basically what these are. Is it's saying, all right, I'm gonna die if I don't start growing. So it's trying to grow and form leaves and whatnot. These little things down here would be the roots. It's trying to grow roots as well down here. So because it's taking some of that stored energy of the potato, it may not taste as sweet, might taste a little bit more bitter, but you can still eat it. It's fine. I eat potatoes like this all the time because I'm cheap. I'm not going to throw that away. Here's just sort of a picture of that. So you've got the leaves growing up. This is a sweet potato, and you've got the roots growing down. You could do this if you wanted to. Um, Grow your own potatoes, so you don't have to, hoard them. You can grow your own. Be self-sufficient. There you go. Pumpkins. We're nearly done. We only got a couple left. Pumpkins. What do you think? Sexual. Pumpkins are fruits. Fruits come from flowers. Here's evidence of that. This little thing right here will grow up one day to be a big orange pumpkin. This was a flower. It's sort of started to wilt because it's done its job. It's been fertilized, so it's sort of wilting and dying away. But yep, pumpkins are fruits. Fruits come from flowers, so flowers are sexual organs. Pumpkins are sexual. Crazy. Starfish. Here's an interesting one. Starfish can reproduce both ways. For one, they use free spawning. So we already talked about that with the Hydra, just releasing sperm and eggs out into the water. They intermingle and they hope that one finds another and make baby starfish. The other thing is that they can use a thing called fragmentation. So you may have heard that you can cut a starfish's leg off and it'll form new babies. Actually, I just realized this isn't in English. uh, Sorry, this is a different. Uh, anyway, you can cut its leg off. The leg will form a new body, and the body will form a new leg. So, kind of like, you know how we talked about when you cut the worm in half, it doesn't actually make two new worms? Starfish do. That leg will form a new body, the body will form a new leg. Now, if you go chopping starfish into tiny bits, will each tiny bit form a new starfish? Probably not. I imagine there's a limit to how many pieces you can cut a starfish into, and this will still work. I don't know what that limit is, and I don't recommend that you try to find out unless you just Google it. Don't go chopping starfish up, guys. All right, that's just rude. But here's a picture of this would have been a arm from a bigger starfish that got chopped off, and it's starting to grow back its other limbs down here. Okay, so just kind of crazy looking. It's fun. All right. Ooh, I had a transition in that one. I haven't had transitions. Tree frogs, they're sexual. Um, Leapfrog, I think we talked about this before. You know that game you used to play as a kid, maybe still play occasionally, Leapfrog? This is where that came from. They're sexual. They do lay eggs. It's a different kind of egg than like a chicken egg, but they do. Where are we at? All right, we're finally done. I hope you think of the world around you a little differently from now on. You're welcome. Things reproduce in all kinds of crazy ways. It's crazy. It's interesting. I love it. I hope that you're as interested as I am. If you have any questions on anything, please email me. Really, the only goal of this is to get you a little bit of an introduction to, I don't know, sexual reproduction. You got to know a little bit about it. There you go. All right. Um, take a look at the rest of the assignment. Make sure you wrap anything else up that you need to, and email me with any questions.